Good morning. Welcome to a special meeting of the Mason County Board of Commissioners for the specific purpose of considering and taking public input on the 2017 budget for the Mason County government. And would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, would you please give us do the roll call?
Commissioner District 1, Randy Netherland.
Here.
Commissioner District 2, Tim Sheldon.
I'm here.
And Commissioner District 3, Terry Jeffries.
Here. So we'll first start with a budget presentation from Frank Pinter, our Director of Support Services. Frank, welcome. And I just want to say publicly, Frank has been working day and night for, 3 solid weeks on some of the changes, and so we appreciate all your effort.
Well, thank you. So I wanted to start off with to discuss the changes that have occurred since the previous meeting. And there's one material change. It's a significant number. Originally, we proposed that we budget for revenue of $260,000 to reimburse the costs in the jail for nursing related to mental health issues. After discussing that with the Public Health Department and others within the mental health fund, those that manage the mental health fund, it was recommended that that is an unsustainable dollar, in that there aren't enough funds available to sustain those dollars going forward into future years. When it was proposed to be something that would come out of the ending fund balance within the mental health tax fund, and then it would be reviewed next year as a function of pressures on that fund. But it was identified early on, last week, that those pressures would be high enough that it would be unsustainable. So it was discussed and proposed that we drop that to $100,000 worth of revenue coming out of that fund, and that $50,000 of that be used to cover additional nursing costs in the jail, and the fund, mental health tax fund, would then contribute $100,000 into the revenue for the current expense component of the county's budget. There were 1 or 2 minor adjustments that were also made. The net impact is that instead of $8,000 worth of cash in excess of reserve, we have $16,000 of cash in excess of reserve. There wasn't an impact because it was dollar for dollar revenue reduction, expenditure reduction. So the net impact was simply some minor adjustments in balancing some of the department accounts. So we have a public hearing to consider the adoption of the 2017 budget for Mason County. RCW 3640-060 requires the Board of County Commissioners to hold a public hearing on the 2017 preliminary budget to allow taxpayers to appear and to be heard for or against any part of the budget. The public hearing also allows county departments to publicly testify if they so desire. Pursuant to RCW 36.40.071 and Resolution Number 111-85, this hearing is to be held on the first Monday in December. Copies of the 2017 preliminary budget were made available to the public on November 21st, 2016. A balanced budget must be adopted by December 31st. So we have 2 options for recommended action today. Option 1 is to move to adopt the 2017 budget in the total amount of $63,564,542 for the special funds, and the current expense fund of $38,545,163, and the total of all funds is $102,109,705. 705. Option number 2 is to move to close the public hearing and consider adoption of the 2017 budget on Tuesday, December 6th at 9:30. There are two small changes that I'd like to make on the second page of the adoption certificate. So under Department and Programs,
I'm not following it.
right there, for the current expense budget. Yep. Department Program 180 and 185 should be separated. The auditor's office has identified that those two should be separated. The total is correct. I'll have to identify those $2 amounts because departmentally they are two separate departments. The Superior Court, which is identified as Department 205, is really 250. That was a transposition error. So these two documents identify the summary of the special funds as well as the current expense departments and programs that are there for their totals for revenue, salaries and benefits, operating, and then total expenditures. There is a separate report that identifies in more detail at a programmatic level the budgets for each of the departments. Any questions?
Commissioners, are there any questions for Frank?
I have a couple.
Please.
Well, thanks, Frank, but just got this morning, so got a chance here to start to figure it out. So at this point last year, 2016, what was our, if we adopt the budget as presented here today, what would have those numbers been for 2016?
So for 2016, I don't have the beginning and ending fund balance components of that, but the revenue was $32,768,245.
Well, wait a minute, I got to start to look at where our revenue.
It's on this report,
All right.
and it's the second column from the left
On page 1?
on
two?
page 1 of 2, and actually the summaries are on 2 of 2.
Okay, so the 32,768,245.
Correct.
Okay, and today we're looking at,
When you go over to the, it's where we start with green, proposed 2016, 2017 revenue is 38 million.
545,163, but that includes beginning fund balance, which is not included in that summary. So the number below that, the actual revenue, is 31,235,219.
30, say that again, 31.
31,235,219,
Okay, so our revenue is $1.5 million less.
roughly.
Okay, about down $1.5 million. All right, how about our expenditures?
So our expenditures.
Compare the 2 years.
Yeah. So the expenditures were 36,667 roughly in 2016 as adopted without ending fund balance. And in 2017, without ending fund balance, is 35,348,000.
Okay, so you're down
$1,003,000.
$1.3 million. Okay. How many employees do we have currently? And are we adding any with this new budget?
There are no additions of employees to this 2017 budget. We currently have 300, it changes, 325, 330, somewhere in there, the numbers of full-time employees
And we have part-time employees.
on top of that,
How many?
and seasonal.
Okay. So that's and last year we added, what, 14 employees?
14.75, I think, was
All right.
the in current expense.
14.75, okay. Okay, so the total budget, if I added everything up, we would be at about 102 million, 102,109.
102,109,705, that's correct.
Okay, and last year we were just over 100,
Just over 100.
just over 100, so we're adding about 2%.
And most of that's in special funds. Actually, all of it's in special funds because current expenses dropped $1.5 million, roughly.
Okay.
Any other questions for Frank?
Not right now.
Is there any questions from anybody in the audience? Okay, well, thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
It sounds like you have some.
Well, I'm
Oh.
not exactly sure what I had to cut $1.2 million out of our operating budget, and I'm really grateful we didn't have to cut employees, because we only added the one last year for.
This is for questions, please.
But a question, Commissioner, I got, last week, I think Wednesday, what our new totals were to be, and jail's now another $440,000 less. I'm just asking where that change is.
From the
Instead of
request?
operating At $1.8 million for the jail, for operating costs that are mostly inmate related, we now have $1.2 million, which I was given 1.4 last Wednesday, so I'm just trying to figure out what that.
As we discussed early on, the
Before you came in.
$210,000 increase for nursing was removed.
So the nursing, taking it from the 10 hours to the 16 hours, is it back to 8 now or 10? Because it was 120,000 more a year the last 2 years, and we didn't get funding for that, so. Our operating budget for jail was 100,000 less.
It was increased 50,000 above what your last year's budget was.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Mr. King?
Are you projecting any income for timber harvesting or shellfish harvesting?
No shellfish harvesting. I believe that's 3+ years out before we start seeing some of that revenue. And timber, there are revenues. I believe we're projecting about 500,000
I think he meant from us.
from the counties or
Harvesting.
DNR timber.
County?
There are no,
That goes into the county
yeah,
budget.
there are no timber revenues this year.
We do receive revenues from Department of Natural Resources when they do harvests within the county borders. We do receive revenues. And looking real quickly where that may be.
That's about $500,000 down from last year where it was,
Man,
I believe, over $1 million.
I think he's asking us if we have any plans on doing any logging this year as we did in the years in the past. And at this point, there's nothing like that in the budget. There is no plans for any of that at this point.
Any other questions? Yes.
My name is Tony Sheldon, Superior Court Judge, and when I look on the website to check what the public got, it indicates that Superior Court turned in our preliminary budget with a projected revenue of over $57,000, but you cut it down in your proposal to $12,000. So I was confused where our revenues went.
The revenue is 56,200.
And
I'm sorry, 58,700 for the Superior.
Where do we see that? Where does the public see that? Because the one on the website tells us it's cut down to $12,000.
Once we adopt this budget, we'll have the modifications, but I'm not sure that the one on the website identifies 12,000.
Could I approach you and give you a
Absolutely,
copy?
yeah.
Is that the one that was put out temporarily for?
Yeah,
for the-
that was just-
okay, so it's not the
yeah.
one that, since we've met and went over all these things?
So everybody can follow along. So the first page of this just identifies that it came off of your website, The second page is the second page from the website that tells you on the right what the column totals mean, because the other pages don't have the column totals. So if you go to the third page, which is labeled as number 67 at the bottom, you'll see that this is the Superior Court revenue area. And the first column being our 26 revenue, starting with child support enforcement. And the second column being what we turned in as our anticipated revenue, $57,600. The third column is what it's been knocked down to. And so that's what it appears that our revenue is, and that's incorrect. So do you know where the other revenue went?
I think what we need to do at this point is to look at this spreadsheet here. This spreadsheet was, I believe, put onto the, well, there's been some slight modifications,
Right,
but this
correct.
one was put on
And
to the
this
website
spreadsheet
as,
has Superior Court revenue at 56,200 plus 2,500.
Okay.
So these are the revenues that are being adopted today for Superior Court and for Family Therapeutic, and then for the Therapeutic Court,
Okay.
the 258,
And so
161.
where would I get that? Is that
This
over
will be
here?
posted, yeah, this is right there.
And did the public get copies of this ahead of time?
Not in advance. These were modifications made from this budget.
Okay. Then my next question, if you go to the next page, which at the top says weapons screening and the bottom says page 64, you'll see at the top these are expenses from weapons screening, and the total is $167,000 that's being proposed. Then when you break, you go into the revenue for indigent defense, and the first several lines are all zeros, but the total revenue is $67,140, which looks like the expense carried from the prior line total down into the revenue. How does that work?
That is summarizing the 000s, and that's why it carried it forward, and that should be 0 instead of 167, 140.
Okay,
So the Excel spreadsheet that generated this should have picked that up as 0.
so at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet, when you get to the whole bottom, is it a different figure than what's in this column?
It's a summary, these are subtotals, and the summary of the bottom is the summary that is on this report as 38,545,163.
So in your new report, you've corrected this, is that what
That
you're
will be
saying?
corrected, that's correct.
Is it corrected?
Yes.
Okay, then the next one I have is for the Office of Public Defense. The first set of revenue under all the zeros is what comes from Office of Public Defense, OPD. And it's totaled here to be $81,000. I'm not sure where the $4,000 comes from, if that's OPD as well. But if you look at the next page, which is the spreadsheet that you gave us most recently on OPD, you're only proposing to spend $63,000 of the $81,000 that's coming in. You see that because the department is 240, the program is 100, and that's where you put the OPD money, and you're only proposing to spend $63,000.
And there, the entire department budget is $796,378 plus 63,452. Again, that's in this report.
Okay, can you just?
Sure,
rattle
that's
off them again?
$796,378 and 63,452.
So about 850,000, just round numbers.
Correct.
Okay, so if we'll keep going on this same packet, back to the page that is with the ending balance for OPD. The first column you identify as being the original 2016 budget for defense services, and that's $862,000.
Mm-hmm.
What wasn't shown here is that during 2016, the budget was revised, and the current figure for the 2016 budget is $1,064,000, well, $65,000.
Mm-hmm.
And you're proposing to cut it down to
859, 830.
859. Currently, year-to-date through when it was printed on November 22nd, the year-to-date figure spent for public defense is $879,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't going to get us through the end of the year for next year.
That's testimony, ma'am. I think we need to
Okay,
reserve
so
that for
I'm trying to
testimony.
figure out if you have this in a different location.
No, the budget that is proposed for the Office of the Public Defender is $859,830.
And where in here are you spending the other $20,000 from OPD?
Which additional 20?
The difference between the 81,000 in revenue and the 63,000 in expense.
Right. You have 81,000 coming in from the state, and you're proposing to spend 63,000.
That would be spent in the total department budget of $859,000.
Okay, but if you understand it has strings attached, so you
Mhm.
need to spend it in one of the categories that you're going to have appropriate accounting and all of that for, and it's not in there now.
That is correct. But as a bottom line department budget, the department has authority to spend the revenue from the district court into the superior court. And actually, last year it was adopted in a similar fashion. The district court was $76,226 of revenue, and the expenditure was $65,897.
Then my, just last couple questions
Sure.
are about the fund that's labeled 130, which we call the murder fund.
Mhm.
My recollection is that the last time it was, the resolution was amended, you have to keep $50,000 in there. Has that been amended again to say that you don't need to do that?
No, again, here, this shows that has $50,000, and that was, that resolution is continuing to be,
But the one that the public got only says that there would be $10,000 and it would be transferred out to something. So,
and that was adjusted to reflect the $50,000 that should be in there.
okay, those are all my questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Frank, would you mind explaining what that document is that she keeps referring to? No, the one that
Oh, this
that
was
judge keeps
the
referring to.
modifications as they were back in November on the 21st. There were a number of budget workshops that had occurred since then that had made a number of modifications to this.
Thank you. So that was a snapshot in time at that moment.
Correct.
On the
And
21st.
it wasn't even balanced at that point in time.
No, yeah, that's correct, we know that.
Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So, since Judge Sheldon raised some of the issues about indigent defense, I'd just like to ask Frank, does the 2017 budget assume that indigent defense will still be an in-house function of Mason
Yes, it
County?
does.
Okay, Are you,
The balance in that is slightly less than what it was adopted in last year. I think it's a reduction of the original adopted budget of around $4,000.
but our budget for indigent defense has continued to rise just astronomically over the last few years.
That is correct.
So we're going to cap it now.
It is set at the dollar amount that is being proposed at $859,000, which is only a couple of $1,000s less than what was adopted in 2016.
In 2016. Okay, is there any consideration in budget consideration about joining with Thurston County in indigent
There is no
defense?
budget consideration in that at all. There is a meeting scheduled, hopefully sometime this week, to have that conversation with Thurston County. But there are no budget consideration in that regard.
Yeah, I think we did that years ago, too. Okay?
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Just one more.
Please.
Sorry. In my experience, in 12 years here, almost, and only in 25 days, who's counting? The county will adopt a budget and then supplemental budgets during the year.
They have the option to do that, yes.
They do have that option. So if things come up and all of a sudden we adopt supplementals. So in 2016, how much did we adjust our budget? It always went up, but how much did we add for supplemental?
To date, we've added $963,000, and we have pending $462,000 that would be adopted, that could be adopted on December 13th.
Okay, so we could possibly add another 1.3 million to the number that you gave me earlier about,
That would be 2016 expenses,
For the 2016 budget, that's
expenses,
correct.
2017.
which were what, 31,235,000, I think?
That's correct.
So we could go to 32,500,000.
The 31 million is 2017's budget for revenue.
Okay, excuse me, revenue.
Right.
Expenses, I think, were 30,
$6,667,000 for 2016.
right.
And that would increase from a budget by $1 million, almost $4 million.
About $1.4 million. So now we're up to about 38 million. And then we have still what we call our 13th month expenditures.
Which are projected to be around 500,000.
Okay. So we'll end this year
But those,
possibly at 38 million.
But that's
But-
expected to be
yeah.
within the budget.
But that's within the
13th
budget,
month
that's
budgeted
cash.
monies.
Yeah, that's cash, but that's projected, that's expected to be within the budget.
Okay. All right.
Unless monies are spent, the 462 that we'll consider as supplementals.
Correct.
What about supplementals for 2017?
Well, we have funds available for that of $16,288.
16,000? And this year we're going to spend 1.3 million in supplementals?
If we'd have known that we have to pay it, then it can't be a supplemental, Commissioner. Supplementals are for unforeseen.
But we've got 16, but I'm just looking at our track record. This year, 2016, we're going to spend 1.3 million on supplementals. And next year, we've got $16,000 bankrolled for that possibility.
Which Yeah.
There is a point in this where
Well,
we'll leave it asking.
Commissioner, that's like testimony, so I'm just asking a question.
Yeah.
I just want to be right in my figures, so,
I was going to say, there will be a point in this where you can recommend any cuts you'd like.
well, Commissioner, I'm just asking a question. The question is, and I think I've got it answered. This year, we added, potentially, we've got another 500,000 to go, right? We'll add
Roughly.
1.3 million, but next year, we've got $16,000 bankrolled for supplementals.
That's our excess above our 9% reserve.
Yeah, do we bankroll for supplementals?
Okay, thank you.
I missed that.
Oh, do we bankroll for supplementals? I didn't
Right.
read it.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, hearing none. Thank you, Frank. We will go ahead and open the floor for public testimony. If you'd like to testify, please raise your hand, you'll be recognized. Judge Sheldon.
My name is Tony Sheldon, Superior Court Judge, and I do ask to go first because Judge Finley's covering my criminal calendar today, and I'd like to get back and relieve her. I have great concern about the lack of funding for the public defense. Judges really don't speak out about anybody else's budget, except when it impacts the administration of justice. And the lack of funding in the public defender's budget at this point will affect the administration of justice. There's a constitutional right for an indigent defendant to have public defense, and I don't believe that it's appropriately funded here. I also bring a bit of background that you folks may not know and Frank may not know, and that is for the 20-some years that I've been here, for most of that time, the Superior Court managed indigent defense. So I have some historical background on how this is coming in and going out. So I hope that my points are helpful for you today. If you do take a look at the handout that I provided, I'm going to go through this to indicate, I've already indicated beginning at the third page that your OPD money looks, and that's the Office of Public Defense, you get that from the state. It looks like that's budgeted for $81,493. It may be $400 less. I'm not sure whether those, $4,000 less. I'm not sure whether that one line is actually OPD money or not. But it's either $77,000 or the $81,000. And the reason historically that this money was divided between Superior Court and District Court is that Superior Court managed the indigent defense for the felonies, for juvenile court, and the District Court managed their juvenile defense funds. So that's why it was historically split between the two lines. It really doesn't need to be split anymore because you have one department doing all of it. So it looks like in the adopted 2016 budget that you didn't split it. Instead, you just set out under your public defense costs $76,226. You're looking to split this money again. I don't know what your theory is, but it wouldn't need to be split because now District Court does not manage their indigent defense and Superior Court does not manage its indigent defense. But what is really alarming is out of this $81,000, if you look at the next page, you're only proposing to spend $63,000 of what's coming to you from the state. Now, I know that Frank has just told us that somewhere in these other lines, hiding, is the other $20,000. But there's strings attached to this money, and you have to account for it appropriately. So I would suggest that this be changed so that you are actually spending the $81,000 in the correct location, which is Department 240 and Program 100. My second concern is if you go 2 pages back to the totals that are set out for the Office of Public Defense for the budget, it indicates that in 2016, the original budget that was passed for the Office of Public Defense totaled $862,646. But what's not added to this spreadsheet that the public got is that during the course of 2016, the 2016 budget was revised, and the revised amount is $1,064,919, which is perhaps a more accurate figure of what public defense is going to cost this year, because you addressed it in a public meeting and you decided that it needed to go up significantly. What also is not stated on the sheet that the public got was that the actual cost through sometime in November for public defense was $879,000 and a bit more. So even through the November time frame, you've expended more than you're proposing to expend for the whole year next year. So I do have a real concern that it's not properly funded. If you'll continue in the packet, the next page is the spreadsheet you just looked at in a different format, and I've put line numbers to the left of each of the entries, because the way it was set out in the original format had a lot of blanks and it was very noisy. It was very difficult to understand. So I put line numbers on each of your lines and then put them in groupings if you go 2 pages back, so that they made a little bit more sense to me. The first grouping is the salary and wages, and then the benefits, personnel benefits. And those really are up to the process that you have for union negotiations, other than the public defense administrator, because I believe that the rest of the employees are within a union. So I'm not commenting on that, because you have to work with those union negotiations. But as you go down, the next group is the felony attorney contract and non-contract payments that are coming out. And you'll see that the revised budget for 2016 currently has in this column $197,000, and spent through November is $146,000. If you look at the projection, which includes the 13th month, we will top out, the county will top out at $175,000 for the contract portion of felony defense. And it's being proposed that you only fund that to a level of $151,000. So it does not appear to be adequately funded for the felony contract and off-contract work. The next line is the offender off-contract and contract and conflict appointments. And that is, in the revised budget, $18,000 for this year. Actually, up to this point, you've spent $12,000. You're proposing to spend $3,000 for that. That's very inadequate. And what is even more concerning is that this is for off-contract and conflict appointments. There isn't any line for the contract appointments. You haven't budgeted proposed to budget any money to pay for a juvenile defender contract. With regard to the next grouping, those are the dependency contracts, and under the RCW, if a child is dependent, there must be an attorney appointed after the child gets to be age 12. And the court can appoint an attorney before that time. So you have spent so far this year on that type of appointment $29,000. You haven't budgeted anything for that for next year. Moving down to the lines with regard to investigators' costs. Excuse me. I understand that when the initial budget was proposed by Ms. Sergojian, she wanted to have some in-house attorneys and in-house investigators. And so when those were nixed, which I understand because you're not going to hire any new people, the money was not then adequately put back in some of these lines. So for example, your investigator costs for adults so far this year has been $13,000. You're proposing 10 for next year. And it's not adequately funded. I'm not going to go through each of the lines. But if you go to the next page and take a look at the line that has the shading on it, the computer equipment, this would be an OPD expense from the state, and you're proposing to expend $3,400. If you take a look at the materials that Ms. Sergojian turned in when she turned her budget in, she asked an original amount of $5,900 for this line. But she explained it that these would be for computer workstations that are proposed for the new positions. Since you're not hiring any new public defenders, I don't believe that you're going to need any computers. So you might be able to put that in a different line. With regard to the district court, which is a real concern, you'll see down here that for the actual cost for a contract in district court being paid in the shaded line where it is OPD money, you've paid so far through November, or probably it's the October bills that you paid in November, $28,000. You're proposing for that contract $25,000. For the indigent conflict work, you've paid through sometime in November $41,000. You're proposing to put in your budget $5,000. For the indigent defense contract that so far you've paid out $38,000, you're budgeting $0. I also have some general concerns about lack of training in your budget. The training is very small, and attorneys are required to attend 16 hours of continuing legal education every year to keep up their bar license. And I noted in the prosecutor's budget that there is $10,000 set aside for training or travel, because they travel to Chelan every year. And I'm not begrudging that at all. I'm just saying that this budget has to provide for the public defenders to be able to get the training that they're required to keep their license. And I just will transition to my concern about the murder fund. And those are the last two pages in the packet I handed up. This was the one that went out to the public anyway, and it says that there would be $10,000. We heard from Frank today that that's been changed to $50,000, and I'm concerned that that may not be enough. Because in January we have 2 murder trials that are scheduled to go to trial, and 1 attempted murder. And so even the $50,000 will not be sufficient to pay for the murder trials that we have going. I just want to bring that to your attention because you may not be following our calendar, but we do know what's upcoming. And if you have any questions, I'll be
questions for the
happy
judge?
to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Judge Sheldon, 2 trials coming up in January and 1 attempted murder.
In January, yes.
Okay, and we look back over your 20 years. I can remember years where we've had a lot more murder trials. How many, can you remember different years where we had more than 2?
Right, it comes and it goes. Hopefully, knock on wood, that we haven't get any more. But We were fortunate to be able to go to the legislature and receive about $80,000, I think it was, towards our murder expenses, because for a small county, I think we had like 8 murders in one particular year, and that's unusual for a small county. And so we were very grateful for the legislature's appropriation of an extra amount of funds for us.
Yeah, I think that was a couple of years. Another question. So in the dependency cases, so these are parents that are giving up the rights for their children, correct? Or the children?
What happens is CPS gets notified that there's a concerning situation regarding a child, and if it's so concerning that the child is taken into CPS custody, then the state will file a dependency petition alleging that the child has been abused or neglected, or that there's no parent capable of caring adequately for this child. And so those are the children that we're representing.
Okay, I know you have to get back to the bench, but those, if a family has 3 children, I think the state law has changed. Doesn't each child require an attorney?
No, you can group them together unless there's a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and our county has seen a very large increase in these types of cases.
We have seen a tremendous increase in dependency cases this year.
And that you feel that the budget will not be able to handle that?
Well, if you look again at that line, you'll see that so far this year we've spent $29,000 on dependent child representation, and you're not budgeting anything for it next year. And so it is concerning.
Do you think the difficulty of what was put down in the budget instructions and using the Munis system where the notes were made in the columns after those expenditures, perhaps that wasn't transferred to the budget office here in the same form, or what? Why don't those notes?
I
survive?
don't know how that worked, but I know that when we turned in our budgets, and I didn't do public defense, but for our budget, we turned in reasons why we were asking for a particular amount, because we had a heads up that we knew something was coming, for example, or we knew that the caseload has grown. But for some reason, there may have been a disconnect because that information didn't get passed through in the budget process. For example, I did point out that where you are in indigent defense asking to budget $3,400 for computer equipment for attorneys that aren't going to exist, had we looked at the budget notes that were turned in, that would probably not have still been in that line item.
Thank you.
And I do want to back up to one thing, and I apologize, I skipped it, and that is the BECA money. In the anticipated revenue for the public defender, and that's located about 4 pages back. It indicates that you anticipate $30,000 coming into public defense from the BECA bill money. This is money the state provides to the counties to be able to serve the needs of kids who are truant and kids that have been so out of control that their parents have come to court and asked that the court intervene and put down some rules. So these are the youth at risk, and these are the CHINS petitions where the child is in need of an actual placement short of a dependency and truancy. You've budgeted for $30,000 there, and that is significantly too high. Our BECA grant for, it's on a biennium, it's the state system of July 1st to the next year, June 30th. And so for July 1st, 2015 through June 30, 2016, the total coming on the BECA grant is $74,044. And for June 30, for July 1st, 2016 to June 30, 2017, it's a similar amount, $74,000. When the BECA funds started coming 20 years ago or more, Judge Sawyer and I decided that it isn't just the juvenile court that's impacted by BECA. The prosecutor needs to file the cases and come to court. The clerk's office needs to get the cases ready and be there in court. The probation office, juvenile probation, has to do their part. And the court at that time was supplying the indigent defense and the court commissioner to hear those cases. So we decided that although the money comes directly to juvenile court, that we would divide it over the participants in this system so that each of their budgets got some of the money. And so we have all along been dividing it in this way. It's changed a little bit as we went through time because Superior Court no longer provides the indigent defense. So that portion went over to the indigent defense line of their revenue. Superior Court no longer provides the court commissioner. We, as judges, hear those cases. But we have had an increase in the amount of kids that have been sent to detention. And so we have put into this mix of dividing up this money, not only juvenile court services, probation services for juveniles, but detention. So they get a share of the money. And so estimating that public defense will receive $30,000 of the total $75,000 is not realistic. Last year they received $17,000. So it really is not realistic in your revenue forecast. The other thing about the BECA funds is that you have to actually do the work, and you have to document that you've done the work. And so each month, the prosecutor, the clerk's office, everyone who receives BECA money sends over to juvenile court a list of what they've done and how much this was costing them. And then that's turned in by juvenile court to the state, and we get our money. Mason County gets our money. The problem is that for July, August, September, and October, public defense hasn't turned in any billings. And so they're not going to even get the $17,000 that they forecasted for this year because they're not turning in their billings. And I know that there has been an upheaval over there, but it still is important to get these basic things done. Why it's also important is if you have turned your bills in each month, and if you have good documentation of what you've done, you can participate as a county in revenue sharing from the state at the end, towards the end of the year. And we've done that successfully in the past, but it's not being done at this point. And I'd take any other questions.
Any other questions for the judge? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you bringing out these finer details. Is there anybody else that would like to testify?
I think Judge Sheldon about covered it. I'm not going to go into detail line by line, but very much the same occurrences occurred in our budget in areas that we're going to be taking cuts. Generally, so the public understands as we move forward, when these cuts are given to us, it's like anything else, it gets passed along to somebody else. Last year, we're going to be cut back $700,000 in outsourcing for inmates and given only $300,000 this year. Roughly, that's 23 people a day that won't be going to jail that normally would be going to jail. We knew a number of years ago, we projected just on our own, nothing scientific, that if we could hold people accountable, first of all, put people at the north end, deputies at the north end, and have an area to place people in jail and hold people accountable, it was our estimate that the crime rates would go down. In fact, we have seen those numbers with the crime rate go down for the first time in many, many years, and quite significantly even compared to any other county that's done it. As a result, and just for public consumption, it would indicate to me that in the future, by not being able to house these people and not be able to outsource, that if that occurred in that manner that we projected, that the manner will probably go the other direction. It is likely that you will see an increase in concerns for public safety within the community. With that, this is going to leave me no other alternative but at a certain point to put a cap on the jail, which is significantly increase the issues that the judges are going to have to place people in custody or have to release people, which we're going back to from a few years ago. It will also significantly increase. We've been asking people to increase for our marine patrol on lakes. We're already looking in a way that's just going to be probably a responsive rather than a proactive to be on lakes next year, which was a great concern last year. And our budget for our vehicles has been cut back significantly. Also, when our vehicles are cut back like that, there's an increased risk and risk management issues that can occur. We brought those up before, and in fact, that can probably be an issue for the future. The last thing is I heard Judge speaking. It reminded me of something else. Oftentimes, I'm not saying every time, but oftentimes when we go into those trial situations or there are circumstances that arise, the sheriff's office is called on for increased security within the courts or because of a certain type of individual that's there that we may need to be called on. With our budgets being cut for that, how are we supposed to increase that security with not having the staffing levels to do so? So there are a number of, I think Judge did a great job of covering each individual area that were changed this year, but the public needs to be aware of that with those changes and issues for public safety, there's going to be a significant, I think, increase in the area of concerns for public safety. So I won't go through each one of those, but those cuts will leave us. Also, it does reflect in the budget. I want to add one thing. It does reflect in the budget in there that shows that part of that did go up in one of our areas to $525,000, something like that. But also remember that
Part of what area?
on our budget line. But what it did go up,
For what?
well, on our overall budget on
Overall, thank you.
yeah, was because those were the contracts, the money that came in to cover the contracts for the jails that had to be that were contracts that were negotiated by the commission. So that wasn't an increase in hours. That money that's going back in there is not for jail funding. It's to cover those contracts for the corrections officers this year. So anyway, you'll probably hear more about that later as we move into this. Thank you.
I want to just clarify that there are no staffing cuts for the sheriff's office, and so any inability to provide extra security in the courts, I assume, is coming from any reductions in overtime. I'm assuming because there are no staffing cuts, that any increases, any needs to provide extra security in the courts that won't be met would be due to any decreases
I
in
think you're correct.
overtime.
Yeah, and that's a concern because
not
in the last
staff.
couple of weeks we've had a couple SWAT call-outs and we've had people lost in outside our county requesting the sheriff's office go out and try to find these people or to have our SWAT team respond. And once again, if you don't have that money in the overtime budget, what do we do? Tell people we're not going? That's a concern. We've already over that just from this year bumping those kind of calls. We don't get to control somebody that ends up in a building, barricaded in a building, if it's in the city of Shelton or if it's in the county. I don't get to control medical costs and things like that. And those are the areas that we just can't predict. And so those are going to be questions of public safety for the next year because of the budget cutting.
I also want to verify or to confirm that there is not a cut from $700,000 in outsourcing. There were increased budget requests, supplemental budget requests to increase the amount of monies that was spent to outsourcing to about $700,000. The amount that was requested by the sheriff's office for outsourcing was $300,000, and that was retained.
Madam Chair, just a couple questions for the sheriff, if I could. So the situation you described when you're called out for these unforeseen circumstances, many of this, of course, this is overtime, and it adds up, and this is, again, what turns up the next year in the supplemental budget to pay for it, because these individuals deserve to be paid, and they do a tremendous job for us here in the county. I did notice in the budget, though, that I believe the courthouse security has been reduced, the amount for courthouse security. I've always been concerned about that because of the incident that happened at Montesano, and that could happen here. When you say that 23 people won't be going to jail because of the outsourcing, the need for outsourcing, is that 23 people per month?
Well, it would be that we would hold during that day for each day for that month.
That would equate to 23 people per month, so times 12, it could be different, might be the same person for a
Yeah.
couple months, but.
And there's a chance too that
but,
maybe,
you know,
maybe we
it's
don't arrest
several-
as many people either. But
That's-
but what we predict on that, but because of what we're gonna be limited to where we're at and what we predicted we would need for the next year in outsourcing, we're stuck at that level. So if, I'm gonna have to put a cap on the jail and stick to that number.
Yeah, so 23 people per day per month. I mean, 23 people, yeah,
Per month.
per month, they won't get in, times, maybe it's the same person, so you're talking about a couple hundred people
So I think it could be.
that will
yes.
be outside when they should be inside the walls.
Yes.
Sheriff, how many commissioned officers are we up to now?
Well, we're full for the first time, but we don't have everybody on the road. We're at, Jim, what are you exactly at? 50. That includes command staff, detectives.
54. And what was your request this year for overtime?
I don't know, what was our number at?
How much
I'm
is your
not looking at it.
request for overtime total for the sheriff's department? Your total
I didn't bring
request?
the number.
Patrol or
For-
patrol, we asked,
for-
we are 100,000 over on patrol right now, so we asked
No.
for 350 for patrol.
What was your total request for the sheriff's department in overtime for the year? You had do you remember, Frank, what the request was?
It-
For all of it, for the sheriff's department?
We could look it up. I wasn't prepared to answer that.
We have it adopted for 8 divisions, but I think for the patrol, that's the highest one, and then the
What was your?
jail is, we have 250,000 for jail, but we weren't,
Chief, what I'm asking is, what was your, you guys had a request, we're talking about cuts off of the
well, that's,
request.
okay, that's,
What
I'm
was your
trying to
total
answer the
request?
question, Commissioner, but when we put our budget in July, we just had cuts and changes several times the last few weeks, and none of those have been publicized yet, but, for the public, but we asked for 250, 350, 400,000 for jail and for patrol overtime.
Total in July, that was your request, was? Okay. We'll check, 'cause
Okay.
That,
yeah.
okay, go ahead.
Oh, that's it.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to testify? Please.
Our sheriff spoke to our budget and takes care of operating an immense public safety operation. So I'd like to speak to the fact that we have 14.7 in our budget at this time.
You have what?
14.7 after our, well, the first review we're having since last year when he spoke to the fact of our budget not being adequate for funding for the total 2016 year. We put in a $14.9 million budget in July because we didn't have the new CBA for half of our 112 staff that was just approved a month ago for the woodworker union. And those CBAs for the deputy and for the woodworker union amount to $700,000 in increases in our sheriff's salary and benefits. And while we're extremely grateful not to have layoffs, we had to make $1.2 million in cuts in operating costs to meet contractually the CBAs, the benefits, and we still do not have, Commissioner, you asked about the overtime. We asked for $350 in overtime for the patrol and $250 in overtime for the jail. And we have $250, $100,000 less. We already spent $350,000 this year, but we have $250. So I want to just go on record and be honest and clear about the fact that we don't have control over the number of call-outs and the number of situations. We do have our last hire. Most of our staff, our patrol was hired at the end of the year, are still going through the academy. They're still in training. We have 2 injured officers at this time. We have other things that happen where we have coverage that we need to have safety and to have minimum manning. And so I just want to be clear that, yes, while we made reductions in our budget, and we kept making those since July, we got a budget just a few weeks ago, and and online, what you see is what we turned in at 14.7, not what we actually just turned in last week. So I don't want the citizens to be misled. But we have an operating budget of $3.7 million before the $500,000 amendment that we're going to have next week. So that would be 14.7, and we were just this morning, given 13.8. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that'd like to testify? Hearing none, I will close public testimony. Thank you. Commissioner deliberation. Anybody like to start some discussions? We heard testimony regarding the indigent defense budget, which, Frank, do you mind? I know that this has been a difficult one. You sat down to, in case folks don't know, we do not have a public defender at this time. We have it contracted with the mostly for case assignment. Administration of the office is a shared responsibility. You had, at the request of the Superior Court, had sat down with the Superior Court administrator to review the budget for the Office of Public Defense, or Indigent Defense. Some of the things you heard today from Judge Sheldon are these issues that are addressed in the revised
They are
2017
not
budget?
addressed in the
Okay.
revised. There are a number of requests that were made by the previous public defense administrator in modifying the department to include a number of additional staff that, as of this budget, is not going to be pursued, that those outsourcing contracts will continue to be contracts, not staffing increases. The overall budget in 2017 that is being proposed is almost the same that was adopted in 2016. There are probably some adjustments that need to be made on a line-by-line basis, going through some of the recommendations that the
Yeah, just interrupt. So
Judge.
today's action will be the
the bottom line.
overall bottom line for the office. Where those monies are set is still another exercise. Is that correct?
That can be modified, that is something that can be modified
Okay.
in
So the
the
going by line
final.
by line was not necessarily it wasn't written in stone, as the judges shared, you know, that certain
Correct.
amount of dollars were not budgeted here, et cetera. Those can definitely be adjusted.
So the overall budget, as it was in 2016, is about the same level in 2017. There are going to be some savings in 2017 because of the lack of the cost of an administrator for a short period of time. That is reflected in some of that reduction. There are no anticipated increases in the salaries for the public defenders, other than what is part of the non-represented salary increases that are proposed. The union that is being proposed has been formed, but it has not started any negotiations at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Frank?
Frank, Madam Chair, thank you. Frank, in this budget, what is the increase for the non-represented employees?
2.88%, it's a 2% across the board and a 0.88 COLA.
So almost 3% increase for all non-represented employees.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners. Well, we did necessitated cuts of about $1.4 million from essentially, well, actually $3.3 million from the requests. Had a lot of discussions in the ensuing weeks beyond that to add back some increases that were determined essential by the departments, and then reduce them again after further consideration in page 3 of 4 of the document that has the, yes.
If I may, The original request preliminary had a shortfall of $7,900,000. And then ultimately, we got down to almost $3 million and then continued to make modifications to the preliminary to get us to where we are balanced, if we can call it that.
Right.
Such that there are reserves of $3,197,000 of cash available. I just wanted to identify that the original preliminary was almost $8 million.
8 million, yes, yes. And I suppose when I said that we had to do the original cuts from the preliminary requests.
Madam Chair, I think Frank's making a good point, and the newspaper reported this as well. So the first budgets that came in, which were in response to the budget instructions passed by 2 of the county commissioners, were, as Leo Kim mentioned from the auditor's office, ambiguous. And I think that ambiguity led to the fact that departments and electeds asked for $8 million more than we were going to have in revenue. And so over the last 6 months, it's been very difficult to pare that down. I think it's been very difficult to prioritize.
I want to just clarify, though, that Commissioner, that the budget instructions were clearly stated there would be no anticipation of new staff hires, and there was about $2 million worth of requests of staff hires. Nothing ambiguous about that. So it's a function also of departments just putting forward what, as they've said to us many times, as the Constitution says, they put forward what they believe is the amount needed to perform the duties of that department. And so regardless of what our instructions may or may not say, there are certain elected officials who determined that they need to put forward the amount they need to fund their operations in an adequate manner, regardless of the amounts of monies available to do so.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
As the Commissioner, was there a proposal that you had that you asked to have put into that request
Yes,
denied?
I did make a proposal.
What was it that was denied?
Well, my proposal for writing the budget would be very similar to what we do at the state level. We decide how much revenue we have, and both parties, in this case, the commissioners, sit in the same room and decide how much money we're going to allocate for the next biennium, or in our case, the next fiscal year. Then we ask the departments or the elected officials to prepare their budget based on a percentage, either up if we have more revenue or down if we don't have the revenue. And then as that budget starts to come together, the officials in charge of the budgets make some decisions on prioritizing. And I think obviously we've heard today a little bit, and I hear from the public all the time that criminal justice is probably the priority, or not probably, it is a priority for our county, state safety, public safety. But criminal justice is not just the prosecutor's office or the sheriff's office or the jail or just the courts. It's all those different departments and electeds working together. So I continue to make that proposal, to answer your question, Commissioner, that the budget be written in a different way. And I think what's happened is that, to get down to the fine points, that the electeds and the department heads have used this Munis system and have written notes to the side of some of the explanations they have for why they have numbers in their budget, and that wasn't transmitted on the same format to the commissioners. So
Actually, it was.
And so I think what happened was there's been this micromanagement that's gone on for several months at different meetings that are just back and forth over numbers where we could have decided that this a little easier, decided it better at the beginning. So I'm willing to take, or give you that as an answer, sir, what I think should have happened, so.
Madam
Please.
Chair, and I appreciate that, Commissioner. My question actually was, at the time when we had our meeting and we made a determination of what was going to be sent out to all the departments, there was a request given of you to ask what would you like put into this letter that you're saying that we two voted for and stuff, and that it was ambiguous and these other things. On that request, I can remember the answer, but in case I'm mistaken, is there anything that you offered up to change that, any verbiage that you wanted put in there that was denied because we kept asking for verbiage? Maybe I missed something. Is there any verbiage that you asked for that we said no to?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that? 'Cause
That we, I'll go through it again for you, Commissioner, that we decide how much money we have in revenue, how much we're going to spend in 2017, and that we ask the departments either to give us that we come up with we the commissioners come up with a percentage increase or a percentage decrease that we're asking the departments and the electeds to present to us. That is not in this. This is the budget instructions. You two signed it. I did not sign, but that was on May 11th, July 11th, 2016. So I hope I've answered the question.
So I fail to see why this is an important issue.
it is.
I think what we have in front of us is a proposed budget, and I think what we need to do, rather than going back to 6 months ago of what somebody wanted and didn't get, that perhaps we should stick to the discussion of whether or not to adopt the proposed budget as presented. Or if there are modifications that anybody would like to make based on testimony or based on your own study of the cuts that were made.
I'm prepared to make a motion, if you'd like.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move to adopt the 2017 budget in total amount of $63,564,542. The current expense is $38,545,163, and the total other funds is $102,109,705.
I think what we need to do, I think those numbers are transposed. So I'd ask for an amendment in
Current
that
expense is 38.
the total amount is 102 million.
Oh, yeah, I see what he did here. All right. So it should read this way. Move to adopt the 2017 budget in total amount of, and we'll go down to the bottom, what he has written, $102,109,705. The current expense is $38,545,163, and a total of other funds is $63,564,542.
I'll second that motion. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the 2017 budget total amount of $102,109,705. Current expense total $38,545,163, and other funds totaling $63,564,542. Discussion.
Well, Madam Chair, I don't think the budget has really had a chance to be examined by the public. The word product I got here today, this morning, is different than what was here last week. The numbers, even on the recommended action here, are transposed. I think that should be correct for someone to read and feel that they are being given the correct numbers. I think the public should get a chance to weigh in. I see a couple people, maybe two here from the public. You have another day to. We have quite a while to adopt this, and another option was to consider this even tomorrow morning, but allow a little more public testimony. So I'm disappointed that there is not as much testimony or not as much interaction by the public here today.
Clarification, was this hearing noticed? Was it put in the newspaper?
Yes.
2 weeks?
Yes.
4 times? Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could ask Diane a question then, but today would be the earliest we could adopt this budget. Correct, the earliest day. So I've been here 12 years. This will be my 12th year. I've got 25 days, but who's counting? I can't ever remember adopting a budget this early. And one that's been this hard to write and one that has this little of a balance remaining.
Commissioner, do you have any discussion? You know,
Actually, I want to thank, I'm sorry. I do
Please.
want to put a thank you. You know, there's a lot of talk and stuff that goes on, but there's a lot of hours that go into creating the budget that, you know, people at home, of course, wouldn't know, as we deal with each part over and over and over again. And, you know, some of us show up for all those meetings, and we try to make our impact and our opinions known and work it all the way through. But none of it can be done from the commission standpoint. We would never survive this. There are entities in this county that work very hard to help us find a way to make this work, because there were some major shortfalls in funding and expenditures last year that were, you know, unexpected, to say the least, in huge amounts of money for them. With that being said, we had people step up and found a way to help us get where we needed to get. We have the courts, we have the auditor's office, we had the prosecuting attorney's office who was put in the paper last week, and I appreciate you putting that out there. There was a lot of people that have worked their rear end off to get us where we need to get right now. And so it makes it sound like we've done this willy-nilly. There's been a lot of budget briefings, a lot of them, and a lot of work done by every department. And I want to thank each and every one of those departments for all their hard work and for coming up with the answers that we needed to get us where we needed to get. Madam Auditor, thank you so very much, and your staff, and the way that all this has been able to come together. Thank you very much.
So just, I appreciate that, and I would concur with everything you said. Just a few highlights of this budget. We increased the amount of monies taken from the road fund to put to Sheriff Patrol to help balance the increased costs in criminal justice. We thank the Public Works Department for consistently going through reductions in the road funds available to them as we increase public safety by using what we call the road diversion option that the legislature has brought us. I appreciate the creative thinking from the Sheriff's Office, and especially our jail chief, around how to reduce costs in our jail. I appreciate very much the prosecutor's willingness to reduce the amount, or to not hire until a few months into the year of a needed position in his office that is open. We've had some increases in costs that were not under our control. Department of Retirement Systems, our medical costs, and then some of our labor and industry rates went up significantly. I think it's well worth noting those issues are outside of our control. But despite that, we had to, once we drilled this budget back to the bare needed increases for next year, including salary increases to retain and recruit the best of the best. Here in Mason County, we still had to find about $1.4 million in operating cost cuts. We were told by many of the department heads and elected officials that these cuts, will go ahead and concur with them. We don't have a way to really make them not happen, but we may need to come to the commission next year for supplemental budget requests. It has always been the job of independently elected officials and department directors to manage within their budget. Failure to do so needs to be scrutinized. We can consistently say that the service pressures on a particular department or office would make it difficult to manage within that budget, and supplementals are required required, unanticipated, but there is still the requirement to be very diligent about the kind of overtime you're okaying, about the kind of expenses you're okaying as a department head and an elected official. And so we ask in this budget that you be cognizant of the fact that there is not a very healthy ending fund balance as there's been in the last 4 years of my service here to Mason County. And so the role to manage the finances within your department and office has never been more important as it is now. I thank everybody who did do the extra work of finding those cuts, of coming to the commission and saying, you know, we can do something different over here. And we've had a lot of creative thinking. Mason County is a growing county, and what we used to do in the old days is definitely not always going to support us through in the future. We have an audit committee that's going to make sure that these monies are expended legally and as the funders had intended. And a lot of processes still need to be put in place to ensure that we can go next year in a budget that everybody understands where the necessary increases are going to be due to things outside of our control and what are programmatic increase requests. And be very, very specific about those. But I think this is a budget that, my first time I've had to do these kinds of cuts. And I appreciated all the work to make those cuts as painless as possible by keeping the number of employees that service our citizens the same.
I just wanted to clarify something for the folks at home, because in all of our jargon, we talk about the actual cash ending fund balance that we will have in the bank, in budget is $3,196,819 is what our expended ending fund balance would be. We keep 9% in reserve. That's the $3 million plus that we keep in reserve to be able to take care of it several months in case anything happens, that we can have money on hand to be able to operate absent any money coming in.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, I'll go ahead and call for the vote.
So just one question then, but Commissioner, that you have to maintain that reserve.
Yes, we try to maintain a
You
reserve,
have to
and
maintain
we also
that
have an
reserve.
option to try and do 12% if we choose. This is by our resolution, yes.
But you have to maintain that. But when I look back, and I asked Frank this question about how many employees we have. He said 325 to 330, and last year the county added almost 14 and three-quarter people. That's our big expense, is people. And we continue to buy lots of software and different programs that help us do accounting functions and other things, and these are very expensive systems that we buy, and they need maintenance. They don't last very long. You have to buy them again, 5 years at least. So my only just parting words on this are that we have to maintain a lower labor force, because we have to take advantage of technology. We've got to move towards the future. A lot of the things that we're doing, I think, and we have terrific staff and utilities now, but our utilities, when you look at some of the our water systems that are over 10 years behind in putting water meters in. Some of our systems are our wastewater system in Allen and North Bay. They get a rate increase every year. The Belfair system, their rates remain steady every year. We've had a philosophy in the past to some of our equipment to run it till it breaks. And at least our staff now is starting to look at more of a maintenance schedule, and I think that's great. But when we look at just the operations, we talked all about the current expense fund this morning, around $38 million, but we haven't talked about the other $63 million very much, if at all. So we have to get more efficient and At one time, as a commissioner here, I can remember when we had close to, I think, 310 employees. Well, I understand that services have increased, the need for services have increased, but I think we have to be always vigilant in how many employees we have, because not only is it paying their wages, it's paying the health insurance, paying the retirement system, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, and the medical costs. So it's a real concern I have as I leave, that our budgets will continue to grow beyond sustainability.
Madam Chair, just a little clarification for the folks at home again. You know, I've always asked who would the commissioner like to cut. You know, each year I've asked that, and how do we get there? On the employees that we've added, we had some employees that were added because we had state auditor findings that required us to do some things that we hadn't previously been doing. I don't think we can cut them because we need them. We had the Supreme Court direct us that there'll only be a certain caseload for public defenders, so we had to bring on more public defenders. There's no way of getting around that I know of. We did make a conscious decision to employ a little bit more so we can keep the doors open at lunch to better serve our citizens, so they could actually have services during the lunch hour when they actually needed them the most. We had code enforcement that we've added. You know, I don't want to cut deputies. We just brought on a bunch of deputies and corrections officers. Matter of fact, Commissioner Sheldon just voted to bring on 3 new positions at the sheriff's office 2 months ago. So I don't want to make it sound like we're just adding people just to make it look good and to throw them in every department. These were absolute needs and requirements in certain areas that had to be fulfilled. And again, each time we did, you know, Madam Chair, we worked our rear end off to figure it out and come up with the best solution we could in order to save money at the same time and positions. We've denied a lot of positions. The ones we hired sometimes are quite necessary to conduct business on a daily basis as a county and serve the citizens.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote, the motion on the table. Just as a reminder, the motion is to adopt the 2017 budget, total amount of $102,109,705. Current expense amount totaling $38,545,163. And the other funds totaled $63,564,542. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays?
No.
The budget is passed. Thank you. That is all the business we had, as this was a special meeting.
Move we adjourn.
Is there a second? Moved and second, we adjourn. We are adjourned.